Hello and welcome to the start of another reading challenge. It's currently the evening of the 29th of August and I'm going to get started with this reading challenge where I am reading books that were selected by my Thoughtful Book Club regulars. So I asked them specifically to pick their favourite books, so that's what I'm going to be reading in this particular reading challenge. Now, there's one book that I have ordered that I'm still waiting to arrive, and I'm having massive issues with post at the moment because I live in a block of flats, but our doorbell is currently broken, so that's a nightmare. And the other book I'm going to be reading on audio. So the book that I'm reading on audio is called When August Ends by Penelope Ward, and this one is a steamy romance novel, so I haven't really read the synopsis. In fact, I haven't really read the synopsis for any of these other than to get a general idea of the genre, although a couple of them I was already familiar with anyway, so I don't know much about this one. And then the one that I'm waiting to arrive is called Lives Other Than My Own by Emmanuel Carrère, which is a translated novel, translated from French, and it's somewhat autobiographical memoir in style, where the author, I think, interviews other families and compares their lives to his own. Again, don't know too much about it, kind of just want to go in. And then I have the other four here. So the first one is one that's actually been on my TBR for a while, and that is The Bear in the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, which is a Russian-inspired fantasy. Then another one that was on my TBR already, we have The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a copy that I picked up in a charity shop quite a while ago, so I don't know what cover this is. That's what the back looks like. I've never seen this cover before. It just says vintage on it. Vintage magic. So if you're wondering why this cover looks different, I don't know either. But I don't know a huge amount about this one either, other than the fact that there's a magical kind of circus in this story, and I think there might be some portal fantasy elements or something like that, so that's that one. And then we have Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, which all I know about it is it's one of the main origin stories for vampire fiction, Dracula of course by Bram Stoker being the first and this one being the other main one. I clearly have never read it before, but I'm going to in this video. And then the final book on this TBR is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon, and I can't work out if this, I think that this is middle grade because it's published by Random House Children's, so I'm guessing that this is middle grade, and I read the synopsis for it last night and it definitely sounds middle grade, and it sounds like, well, it says 15-year-old Christopher has a photographic memory. He understands maths, he understands science. What he can't understand are other human beings. So I'm feeling like the character in this might be on the spectrum somewhere and might have Asperger's as well, which is interesting. And he is investigating the death of a dog. And I'm not looking forward to reading that part because I get very emotional about animals in books. But hopefully that will be a very small part of this story and I'll be able to get through it. So those are the four that I have physical copies of. I have got audiobooks through my library already of The Bear and the Nightingale and The Night Circus, and I have Interview with the Vampire and The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime on hold, and they should hopefully come in fairly quickly. I'm not too worried about this one because it's middle grade and the font is quite big and the margins are quite big and all that stuff, so this one should be a fairly quick read anyway. But this one is quite an old book, so I think I would quite like to listen to the audio as well. It was published in 1976, not as old as I thought, but still I would like to listen to the audio of this as well if I can. And then When Penelope Ends will be an audiobook anyway, but Lives Other Than My Own isn't available as an audiobook, as in it doesn't exist as an audiobook, so I'll be reading that one physically as and when it arrives, and I don't actually know when that will be, so I'll have to keep an eye on that. I got that book, Lives Other Than My Own, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, and Interview with the Vampire, from a website called World of Books, which is an independent online used bookshop in the UK. So I ordered these 3 from there. Like I said, this one I already had from a charity shop, and this one was the same price brand new as it was secondhand, so I figured I'd just get a brand new copy of that one, but I saved a bit of money on the others. Okay, it's now later in the evening and I've read the first 66 pages of The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. The audiobook is reasonably good, not the best audiobook I've ever listened to, but pretty good, and I'm really enjoying the story so far. We have met a few characters, we've kind of been introduced to the Night Circus, we've been introduced to a competition, and I didn't know that there was a competition in this, which is interesting because I love a competition trope, so I'm interested to see where that's going to go and how much of a part of the story that's going to play. But I am enjoying it so far. Like I said, I'm only 66 pages in, so I've got a fair old way to go because it is 490 pages long. So it's quite a long book, and I've listened to nearly 2 hours of the audiobook, 1 hour and 49 minutes, so I have 11 hours and 50 minutes left, which is just under 6 hours of listening time at my speed left. And even though I was supposed to have to wait a little bit longer for it, the audiobook for The Curious Case of the Dog in the Nighttime has come in, and that one is only 6 hours long, so maybe I'll read that one next after this one, which we'll see. I'm hoping to finish this one tomorrow, which is Sunday, because I am really enjoying it, and it's one of those books I feel like you do get pulled into quite quickly so far, so I didn't want to put it down, but it is currently 10 to 11 and I am feeling very, very tired. I have a bit of a headache, nothing new there, so I am going to go to bed and get some sleep and carry on with this one in the morning. Hello, it's actually now Monday. I had a massive tension headache yesterday, so I didn't vlog and I was busy with other stuff anyway, and because of my headache, when I have these headaches I struggle to concentrate a little bit, and so I didn't carry on with reading The Night Circus because I didn't want my experience of reading that book to be tarnished by trying to force myself through it when I wasn't feeling very well. So I decided to read The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime instead, this one. Not because I was happy to tarnish that experience, but because this is middle grade, it doesn't require as much concentration and it was shorter, so I could read this and still enjoy it while feeling unwell, whereas I wouldn't have been able to do that with the Night Circus, I don't think. So I did read the entirety of this book yesterday. I think I already mentioned the audiobook for this was only 6 hours, so at my speed it was 3 hours, which I managed to do in the evening. And I have so many thoughts about this book and I really want to discuss it with you, so this clip is going to be a little bit long, for which I apologise. But this story follows Christopher, who is on the autistic spectrum, so he has ASD and he also has Asperger's like presentation as well. Now, just diagnoses are not discussed in this book at all. It is just clear from his narrative style that that is the way that he presents. And it was a really, really, really interesting look at ASD and Asperger's. And of course, this is the depiction of only one kind of presentation, because ASD is a spectrum, and so everybody who has ASD will present very differently, and somebody with ASD with Asperger's like presentation will present very differently to someone that does not have Asperger's type presentation. So it meant that Christopher was more communicative than he would have been if he didn't have the Asperger's type symptoms, but the Asperger's also made him a little bit awkward in his interactions with other people, and particularly strangers. That's quite a big feature in this story, how he copes with talking to strangers, i.e. he doesn't like it, he doesn't trust strangers, and that's part learnt behaviour but also part of his own personality. So I really enjoyed the way that Mark Haddon presented Christopher's character and Christopher's symptoms and the impact that those have on him and his personality. So that was really, really enjoyable and it really shone through. So this is first person narrative style, and I think that that was a really good choice for this book because it allowed us to see into the mind of Christopher and not just see his actions but also the reasons behind those actions. And he had reasons for everything. He was incredibly intelligent and insightful, and you could really understand why he behaved in the ways that he did in this story. And that made it also very emotional in a lot of places. So the main sort of storyline of this book is that the neighbour's dog is murdered and he is investigating what happened, and that leads him to a lot of information that is unexpected. And that plot was interesting and I enjoyed following the plot, but really the characterization is what makes this book great. The other thing that I want to talk about in this book that made me so angry, because it's so true. Those of you who don't know, I am a solicitor. I'm not practicing at the moment. I'm working at a university teaching law to prospective barristers. But before I was doing that, I was acting as a solicitor in a law firm, acting for people who lack capacity. Some of those people were on the spectrum, some of them weren't, some of them had dementia or they had various conditions that impact upon their mental capacity. And my job really was to help them get what they wanted most of the time. Sometimes I acted for their family members, but most of the time I acted for the people who didn't have capacity to make decisions for themselves, but they still knew what they wanted in life, and sometimes they needed a court to help them get that thing, and so that was my job. And that put me into a lot of contact with a lot of social injustice, which is part of why I decided to take a break from that, because my mental health was suffering, so I decided to take a break. But this book, it was published in 2014, but it is set in the early 90s, I believe. So ASD is more known about now than it was, gosh, 30 years ago. Wow. And that might be part of why diagnosis isn't discussed in here, because it wasn't as easy to get a diagnosis 30 years ago as it is now. And the reactions of people to Christopher and his presentation were aggravating and upsetting and angering, particularly his relationship with the police in this story. So the police come up a few times in this book, and very, very early on he has an interaction with the police that is just still so accurate, and it makes me so incredibly angry. I'm going to get very slightly spoilery here just for the purposes of this conversation, because I don't think it makes sense if I'm being vague. But essentially, and this is sort of in the first 30 pages of this book, so it's not a massive spoiler, Christopher discovers the murdered dog, and this makes him sad, and so he's holding the dog, and then the dog's owner blames him for the death of the dog because he's there with the dog. And then the police arrive and they're asking him questions, and I think that it's quite clear from the way that he's answering these questions, or at least it was to me, pretty much immediately clear, even just from the way that he was answering the questions that he presented with ASD. So, and again, more commonly known now, I suppose, than 30 years ago, but still. So, without provocation, because the policeman isn't getting the answers that he wants, and bear in mind, this is set in the UK, and Christopher is clearly a minor. He's 15 years old in this story. The policeman would have known that he was a minor. Policemen shouldn't be questioning a minor without an adult present, or an appropriate adult present. That should not be happening. That's not lawful. And then, because the policeman isn't getting the answers that he wants, he decides to grab Christopher, which he shouldn't do either, especially not with an adult present. And the complainant, i.e. the owner of the dog that's been murdered, doesn't count as an adult. The adult has to be there for the person being questioned, not the complainant, as in this case. I'm sorry if I'm getting jargony, I'll try not to. So he grabs Christopher, and part of Christopher's presentation is that he doesn't like to be touched. That's pretty typical for people with ASD. And so he starts screaming, and this aggravates the policeman, who is still not acknowledging that this is a minor and somebody who has additional needs, which in my view is pretty clear. Anyway, so he grabs Christopher, and Christopher starts screaming, and then Christopher hits the police officer, which he knows he shouldn't do. But he did it to try and stop this police officer from grabbing him. So the police officer arrests him and puts him in the car, but doesn't caution him, which again is unlawful. If you're going to arrest somebody, you have to give them the caution, which I I would question whether or not Christopher would even be able to understand what that caution meant, which would probably invalidate the arrest anyway, because again, he doesn't have an adult present, and the police officer has done absolutely nothing to try and ensure that he has an adult present, which, even if he didn't have ASD, would be a requirement because he's a minor. So that's just one example of something that happens in this book that makes me incredibly angry, because that kind of thing still happens today. I had a case where something very similar happened to a client of mine who has ASD, and it just makes me so mad, because there's nothing wrong with people who have ASD. They just need a little bit of different support, and it's not difficult. It's really not difficult to provide that support. It is difficult if you're that person's primary carer. There's going to be strain on you. The point is, it's not difficult to make those adjustments. You can make them if you're in the position of a police officer, in a position of authority and power, and somebody who this particular character respects. You shouldn't treat anybody like that, but you shouldn't, it just, I'm getting on my soapbox. It made me really cross, and there were lots of interactions with just everyday people on the street who just treated Christopher with disdain for his difference, and it made me so angry, because he is a person just like everybody else, and he deserves exactly the same amount of respect as everyone else, and he doesn't get it because he presents differently. He is ridiculed for the way that he presents, and I'm not going to get into specifics because that sort of comes later in the story and I don't want to spoil, but I think that everybody should read this book, or a book like it. I think it's so important for people to understand what autism looks like for one person. This is just one example of one type of presentation of ASD, and again, it's a spectrum, and everybody's an individual, so nobody is ever going to present the same exact way. None of us do, and the same is true with a mental health condition. And this book is really important. I think I'm going to be buying a copy for my young cousins and asking my aunt and uncle to read it, and then for my two cousins to read it, because I think that it's so important that people understand that neurodiversity is just that. It's diversity. It's not difference. It's not a problem. It's not something to be fixed or ridiculed, or you have to make allowances for a person and help that person, but you don't have to treat that person like they're crazy or like they are diseased or, you know, anything. They're still a person, basically. I'm going to get off my soapbox now. I think I've said what I wanted to say, but my point is I really highly recommend this book. I think it's important. It is middle grade, so I think it's written in a way that is interesting for an adult reader, but accessible for a middle grade reader, because it's a middle grade book. So I do think it's a good one. If you have or know young children who could do with learning about ASD, and by who could do with, I mean everyone. So yeah, highly recommend this book. Really glad I read it. Really enjoyed it. I mean, I did enjoy it. There were some bits that were sad, which clearly I didn't enjoy, but overall I enjoyed reading this one and I thought it was really good. And today I am going to go back to reading The Night Circus, and this clip is really, really long and I'm really sorry. Hello, it is now Tuesday and I did finish The Night Circus last night and I really, really enjoyed it. It's still atmospheric. I have read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. That one was more atmospheric than this one. I think the plot was much stronger in this than in Starless, and I really enjoyed it for that. And I did also really like the characters in this one, and the relationships between the various characters felt better established in this story than in Starless. This isn't really meant to be a comparison, but I can't help but compare since I've read both of her books now. I said this to Candice, who requested that I read this book. This one was requested by Hazel, so thank you very much, Hazel, for asking me to read that one. I really enjoyed it. This one, thank you, Candice, because I also really enjoyed it. And I was saying to her yesterday that there's something that feels quite ethereal and less tangible about this story. I don't know if that makes any sense. I really enjoyed this one and I really liked the magic of Le Cercle de Rêve, and I enjoyed the characters, like I said, and the relationships between them. So I'm really glad that I finally got around to reading this one, and I think it is the kind of story that you would benefit from rereading, because I feel like there's stuff near the beginning of the book that doesn't make sense because you don't have the context yet, and it's not meant to, but if you then go back and reread it knowing what you know about the story, it takes on a whole new meaning. So I will do that at some point, obviously not straight away, but I did really enjoy my time reading this one. I think I'm going to read The Bear and the Nightingale today, and I'm going to paint my nails just now, I think, and start listening to the audiobook, and I will check in with you once I have read this. It's now Friday. I haven't updated you since Tuesday because I am being a terrible vlogger this week, so I apologise for that, but I have finished The Bear and the Nightingale, and this story is set in Russia, and it's set in a sort of small hamlet type place in Russia, and we follow mostly Vasya, but sort of her family as well. So Pyotr, her father, is kind of like the chieftain, I suppose, of the surrounding area. And there's a little bit of politics at the beginning that went a little bit over the top of my head. But anyway, so we follow mostly Vasya, like I said, and she is a little bit of a wild child, as it were. She wants to, you know, be out exploring the forests and not behaving the way that a young lady should, and she can see the spirits of like the old religion, and there's a lot of discussion on Catholicism taking over from the old ways in this story. But I don't want to tell you too much about what the story is about because the plot isn't the focus. A lot of the focus of the story is on the atmosphere and on the characters. So like I said, it's set in Russia. It's very much based on Russian mythology, which funnily enough felt a little bit more familiar to me because I actually read Spinning Silver last month for my reading challenge, and that was based on Russian mythology as well. So a lot of the same characters were present here from that Russian mythology, like the Rusalka and the Domovoi and the Winter King, and they all play a role in this book as well, because it's the same mythology that's being drawn on. So a little bit of that was familiar, which was nice. And the atmosphere was really great in this book. Everything that everyone says about Catherine Arden doing really well at writing cold is accurate. She is very good at writing cold, and you know, you could really feel the frigidity of the place that everybody was living in this story, and I really enjoyed this. I don't recommend it for people who are plot-driven readers, and I don't recommend it for people who need the plot to start, like, straight away. I do tend to prefer a fast-paced book, and this wasn't really. I'd say it was probably medium-paced, because there was always something going on, but it wasn't always the main plot. So bear that in mind. It didn't bother me, because I'm a character-driven reader. We were spending enough time growing with the character for it to not bother me. We start off before Vasya's even born, and then we go all the way up till she's about 18 years old, I believe, maybe a bit younger. So, you know, we're quite literally growing with the character in this story, and I really enjoyed that, and I liked Vasya as a character. She's very, you know, tenacious and no nonsense, and isn't overly bothered about what other people think of her. She's quite happy for them to just go ahead and think whatever they want, as long as she's doing what makes her happy and what's right for her and her family. She doesn't really care if everybody thinks that she's weird or crazy or seeing things. To her, it doesn't matter. And I really liked that about her. So after reading The Bear and the Nightingale, I yesterday read When August Ends. It actually took me a few days to read The Bear and the Nightingale, not because there was anything wrong with the book, but because I was having a lot of headaches, and that was just impacting on the amount of time I was able to spend reading. So then yesterday I read When August Ends by Penelope Ward, which is an adult romance. There are some sexy scenes in it, so it's definitely adult, but I wouldn't necessarily call it smut. I don't think it's got quite enough of the steamy stuff in it to be categorised as that, but it is dual perspective. It follows Heather and Noah. Noah is an older man who, I say older, he's not that much older. He's an older guy who is staying on Heather's property for the summer. He's hiring out their cabin on the lake, and Heather lives at home with her mum because she's her mum's carer. Her mum suffers from depression, and so Heather kind of runs the place. And Noah's just really hot, and you can see where this is going. He thinks he's too old for her, but she's really into him, blah blah blah. But actually, it was a very cute story. It's very short. I didn't want to pay £13 for a paperback of like a 200-page or 300-page book, so I just got the audiobook on Audible using a credit. And it's only 7 hours long as an audiobook, and it's only available on Audible, which is annoying. I hate it when audiobooks are Audible exclusives, but that's a whole other thing. So I listened to it, but I listen at a higher speed, so it only took about 3 and a bit hours to listen to, and it was really enjoyable. It was really fun. I liked both of the characters. It's dual perspective, but the majority is from Heather's perspective. I liked both of them, though. I thought the narration was really well done. Speaking of which, the narration of this one was really good too. I listened to that one through my library, and I enjoyed the story. I mean, it's, you know, with with adult romance, it's usually more plot focused than character focused, but I did feel like this one had a nice balance. It is still leaning towards plot more than character, but I enjoyed the plot. It was very, very sweet. There were some bits that I was a bit like, I don't get scandalised easily, but there was a panty sniffing section that I was like, really? Do people actually do that? I don't know, it seems kind of gross to me, but whatever. But I really enjoyed myself with it. So now I am reading Interview with a Vampire, or Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. I'm on page 78 of this so far, and what can I actually tell you? I mean, what it is all in the title. It's a boy or a man, a young man, is interviewing a vampire about how he came to be a vampire and what his life as a vampire has been like. And so far it's been pretty tame. I don't know if this is meant to be... I really don't know what genre this is meant to be, fundamentally. I think it's sold in, like, the horror section, but as you know, I'm a wimp, and I'm very sensitive to that kind of thing. And this isn't scary at all. Not at all so far. Page 78. I haven't been scared by, like, or even tense, really, because, you know, I mean, if it's a vampire book, you kind of expect for there to be some murder going on. So if and when that happens, it's not exactly surprising, or, I mean, it's bad to say troubling, but, you know, it's not troubling because it's a vampire book. I mean, this is one of the early ones, isn't it? I think, you know, other than Dracula, this is pretty iconic in terms of vampire fiction. It's like the second big one after Dracula. And good news, Lives Other Than My Own just arrived today, which I was getting really worried about because I want to read this weekend so that I can get this vlog out to you next week on Thursday, which I wouldn't be able to do if I didn't have the book to read, because it's not available as an audiobook, and I think it's going to take me a little while to read it. I mean, it's not that long, 243 pages, so hopefully it won't take too long, but because it's non-fic, it will take me longer. So I'm glad that this has arrived, but my aim is to finish this today? That might be a bit optimistic. I've got about 5 and a bit hours left of the audio. It's now Saturday and I have not yet finished Interview with the Vampire because, lo and behold, I ended up with another headache yesterday, and I just find it really, really difficult to concentrate when I have a headache. My headaches are tension headaches. I used to get migraines, but luckily I haven't had a migraine in a while. But I get sort of pain in my shoulders and in my neck, and it just makes it really uncomfortable to read physically, and sometimes I get very sound sensitive, so listening to an audiobook isn't always easy either. So I haven't made a whole lot of progress. I'm now on page 162, so I'm not even halfway through yet. I have 8 hours of the audiobook left, which is about 4 or just under 4 hours left at my speed. I'm currently listening at 2.15 speed, but I will finish it today and start Lives Other Than My Own today. I'm enjoying it so far. I don't want to say too much because I'm like nearly halfway through now, so I don't want to spoil, but there's a specific character that gets introduced probably about a third of the way through ish, and since that character has been in the story, I've been enjoying the story more. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen with that particular character and what else is going to happen in this book. So I'm going to carry on listening to the audiobook of that while I get some jobs done, and then I'll update you once I've hopefully finished it. It's not going to take me 4 hours to do my jobs around the house, so once I finish doing all the jobs I will then try and find my place in the physical book and carry on reading until I've finished, and then I will update you then, and later I will start Lives Other Than My Own. I have finished my cleaning and tidying, and I now am on page 220, which leaves me with 140-ish pages left to go and about 2.5 hours of the audiobook at my speed. But I am going to take a break from this now because my phone needs to do an update and I can't use it while it's updating. So while it's doing that, I think I'm going to start Lives Other Than My Own, just to get a sense of the style of writing and whether I'm going to find it a heavy book or a light book to read. I suspect it's going to be heavy, but I just kind of want to get a feel for the writing style while I'm taking a break from this. And I don't feel like this is particularly bingeable anyway, because of the style that it's told in. It's told in interview style, of course, but it's not like question and answer. It's really just Louis, the vampire, telling this story. So it's a little bit reminiscent of Name of the Wind in terms of style, and I guess it's almost like memoir style, really, and I'm not overly keen on that particular style of storytelling because I feel like it leaves you a little bit detached from the characters and everything that's going on, even though that doesn't make sense because it's the person telling you their story. I don't know, I just don't feel as connected to the characters as a result. And also the plot in these kinds of stories is a little bit more meandering because you're following a life rather than a specific plot line. So for all of those reasons, I'm finding it a little bit difficult to connect to the book. So I'm still enjoying it. It's not scary at all. I can see why it's like classic horror, but like I said before, I think maybe I'm just desensitized to vampire fiction being scary. Like, I don't particularly find zombie fiction scary or ghost fiction scary because I've consumed so much of it that that kind of content just doesn't scare me anymore, because I feel like even though it was original at the time this was written, I have read and consumed a lot of vampire stuff. So there's nothing that's going to happen in here that's going to be particularly surprising to me, and I can definitely see the influences of Dracula in the last section that I read, so part 2. This isn't really a spoiler. The character is in Europe just now, and so I'm definitely sensing some of the Dracula inspirations which I read earlier this year, but I just struggle to connect to this particular style of writing. So there's that, but it's not scary, or at least I don't think so, and I'm a wimp, so if I don't find it scary, I don't think anyone will find it scary. And it's not even that gory, really. I mean, there's a little bit of blood occasionally and wounds and things, but it's not overly descriptive because this is someone telling their story. Why are they going to describe in detail what a wound looks like or what blood looks like? It's just not going to happen. So it's not particularly graphic, I guess. I don't know. I'm just not finding it scary, is my point. But I'm going to take a break from it now while my phone updates and give a little start to Lives Other Than My Own and see how I feel about that. This is also a memoir, so I'm worried that and it's non-fiction, so I am a little bit worried about it and a little bit nervous about it because it's just not something I ever read. So we'll see. It is now Sunday, and I did indeed finish Interview with the Vampire yesterday. Nowhere near as early in the day as I had hoped because I fell asleep on the sofa for 2 hours, which, I mean, I should expect it at this point. And everything I said about this already stands true. I liked the lore, I liked seeing where a lot of vampire tropes originated. I liked seeing the inspirations from Dracula itself. There's a section where they're in Eastern Europe, which feels very Dracula-esque, and the storytelling itself feels very Dracula-esque in terms of atmosphere and vibe. I don't get on too well with the interview style format of storytelling, like I mentioned, but I do think that it was done really well, and I think that if you like The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, you will like this, and vice versa. And I found the end quite abrupt, but it is part of a series, so it doesn't feel like a standalone because it's not. So overall, I liked this. Not necessarily my favourite type of storytelling, but I am definitely glad that I read it. And I'm now reading Lives Other Than My Own, which is a fairly quick read. I'm not that far in, to be fair. I'm only on page 54 of this so far. I do want to finish this today. I didn't realise that the beginning part of this memoir follows Emmanuel's time in Sri Lanka after the tsunami in 2004 on Boxing Day, and I hadn't realised that, and I vividly remember that happening. I remember it being Boxing Day and the news being on and the newscasters talking about this horrendous disaster, and it took quite a while for me to realise that it actually was that tsunami, because it doesn't mention it until nearer to the end of that passage, that section of this book, and I had been thinking about that disaster the whole time I'd been reading it, and then I realised that it actually was that disaster, and it was just horrendous. And so we've moved on from that now. They're back in France, and now it's the other life that Emmanuel is going to be discussing, I think, for the rest of this book, which is his sister-in-law's cancer. And so far this has been very sad. I don't really like Emmanuel as a person. I think he's being quite unashamedly selfish, and I think that's the point. You know, he's not trying to paint himself as a hero in this narrative, and he certainly isn't that. A lot of the pain that others are going through is being turned back around onto how it's eclipsing things in his own life. So that's an interesting approach. At least it's honest, I guess, but it doesn't make me like the author particularly much. But I am finding the book interesting. So far I do find the writing style very digestible, is the word I'm looking for. So I'm going to carry on reading this. Believe it or not, it's now actually Wednesday, so I haven't updated this vlog for quite a few days now, so sorry about that. I've just been really distracted, but I did actually finish Lives Other Than My Own on Sunday evening, so I've now finished all the books in this reading challenge. I have been trying to decide how to talk about this one because it's a memoir, and Usually, when I'm reviewing a book, I will talk about my enjoyment of the book, I will talk about the characters and the plot and the pacing, and a lot of that doesn't apply here. I obviously can't talk about the characters because they're real people and they're not characters. It's a recounting of people's lives. There's no plot because, again, a memoir. I don't really feel comfortable commenting on my enjoyment of reading about someone's life. So that doesn't leave me with much. I found the writing really accessible and easy to read. It wasn't a drag at any point, and this is a translated work, so I think that that's a testament both to the original writing and to the translator. And there are parts in here where there's reference to something within the French legal system, for example, and then there's a footnote explaining what that means or what it's about, or, you know, the cultural relevance of that particular thing. I don't know if that's something that was included in the original text, but I found it quite helpful in this translated version. There were some discussions of legal processes and things in here which I did really enjoy, and I will freely admit that I'm a solicitor. I like to geek out over that kind of thing, so I did enjoy that. I think I mentioned already that the author wasn't afraid to allow his audience to dislike him and to put his flaws right out in the open. And what that allowed him to do was to show how hearing the stories of the people that he came into contact with during these two events that occurred in his life allowed him to grow as a person. But he, you know, he didn't try to then say that, you know, now he's perfect because of these experiences, because he still evidenced throughout that a lot of the time he was also thinking about himself while he was hearing about these awful stories of things that had happened to other people. So he's not the most likable person, but he also acknowledges that, which I thought was really interesting. It's not like you've got an unreliable narrator here who is trying to make themselves out to be some amazing person. He's quite comfortable putting his flaws on show, which I thought was quite brave, actually. And I will say, triggers for, you know, death and grief and just generally, this memoir is incredibly sad. As I think I mentioned before, it follows the events following the tsunami that happened in Sri Lanka in 2004, and it then follows the death of his sister-in-law. She dies of cancer, and the impact that has on her friends and family and her young children. So it's not an uplifting book in any way, bear that in mind, but I did enjoy being pushed outside of my comfort zone because I've never read a memoir before. So thank you so much to Julie for asking me to read this one. It really pushed me outside of my comfort zone and made me try something that I wouldn't have thought to pick up otherwise. Running through all of the others, ditto, thank you to Lisa for asking me to read this one, Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. Again, it's something that falls within the classic horror genre, and so not necessarily something I would have picked up on my own. Luckily, I didn't find it particularly scary, so that was a positive. I didn't love the distanced feeling of the storytelling, but I did find all of the vampire lore and its origins very interesting indeed. I then read When August Ends by Penelope Ward. So thank you to Michelle for asking me to read that one. That one was an adult romance with a little bit of steam but not loads, and I've read that kind of book before. I do often enjoy them, and some of the other books in this challenge were a little on the heavy side, so I really appreciated the lightness and the fun and the cute that this one brought, so thanks to Michelle. Thank you to Deborah for asking me to read The Bear and the Nightingale. This was one that was on my TBR anyway, one I've been wanting to read for actually probably a couple of years now. When did this even come out? Was it out a couple of years ago? I think it was. And yeah, 3 years ago in fact. So I've had it on my TBR for a while, and this was just the push I needed to finally read it, and I'm really glad I did. I enjoyed especially the atmospheric nature of the story and the character of Vasya. Then thanks to Candice for asking me to read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is another one that's been on my TBR for quite some time, and this again was the push I needed to actually get around to reading it. Funnily enough, I've already read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, which I really enjoyed and which also made me more keen to read this one, and yet I still hadn't picked it up. So, and again, I really enjoyed this story. I liked the atmosphere in this one too. I enjoyed the writing. I liked the characters. I found the plot intriguing. So overall, this is a really enjoyable experience too. And finally, thank you to Hazel for asking me to pick up The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This is a book that I had not even heard of, but actually ended up being right up my street, and I feel like Hazel clearly knows me very well, because this was a fantastic middle grade story that's also an important read for anyone. I think I really loved the autism spectrum disorder rep in here, and I think the author did a really good job with that. So on the whole, this was a pretty successful reading challenge, and I really enjoyed reading your favourites. It was really fun to do that and to be able to discuss them with you as I went along. Keep the conversation going with me either on Instagram or down in the comments. If you have read any of these books, anyone else, then let me know and feel free to discuss them in the comments as well. And that's it for this reading challenge. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.